Stephen is more than anybody I've ever known or heard of expert on this subject. Thank you.
Actually, that isn't true. Thank you very much. No, the person you really want to hear is a chap called Chris Stokes, who's a lifelong railway man, very dedicated, and has come out against this and is helping the opposition. Because I know, if I said I know very little about railway operations, I'd be flattering myself, so I actually know nothing. But I do know quite a lot about demand forecasting, how you decide what modes people choose, and project evaluation. Anyway, Chris is the man I shall be referring to. The first part of my talk, I just want to run through the arguments given for HS2 and say why none of them works. The most important argument by its advocates is that we need it for capacity. We don't need it for capacity for two sorts of reasons. One is that the need for new capacity on this route has been greatly exaggerated. It's actually, the West Coast Main Line is less crowded than any other main line out of London except for HS1. Secondly, they've made a mistake in their, they seem to have made a mistake in their forecast by extrapolating. There was a big jump probably caused by the improvements already made on the West Coast Main Line. So they've taken this short-term growth and extrapolated it as if it represented long-term demand instead of just representing response to an improvement. You always get that sort of thing. And they haven't, there's no account being taken, although this forecast go for 60 years from the time it opens, there's no account that's been taken of the possibility of substituting telecommunications of some long distance travel, which was likely to happen anyway and could be helped along by policy. But even more important than that, my second argument, even supposing all these implausibly high forecasts were correct, we do not need HS2 to provide the capacity to meet them. They can be provided by improvements to the West Coast Main Line costing about $2 billion. This, I just mentioned Chris Stokes, he's done these, he's shown how this can be done. His calculations have been checked by Atkins, which is the leading consultant for HS2 Limited. Basically what you have to do, you have to get rid of 3 bottlenecks on the existing main line, one of which Network Rail is already working on. You have to lengthen trains and platforms, and on each of the existing mainline trains you substitute 1 second class or 1 first class carriage, because the first class are never full. And that's all you need to meet these implausibly high forecasts. The second argument, we need this to regenerate the north and close the north-south divide. It's just as likely, in fact, in my view, probably more likely to have the opposite effect. It's more likely to suck activity into London. And if you want references to this, as a professor of regional economics, I think he's called at LSE, called Henry Overman, and a chap called John Tomley, who holds a similar post at the Bartlett School, Bartlett University College. And if you Google them, Overman, Tomley, HS2, you'll find the data. Tomley, I think, is particularly impressive. He used to have, he's northerner, he comes from Gateshead. He used to have the same sort of job at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne. It simply isn't true. It will not reduce, another argument, actually it's been dropped recently, but nevertheless I'll state it because it was quite prominent. I wrote to David Cameron just after the 2010 election, and I got a letter back from an official in the curiously named Direct Communications Unit, so their job is to stop anything getting through, saying that HS2 is an integral part of the government's low-carbon transport strategy. Now the claim is that it will be broadly neutral. They say, in fact, in the first 60 years, it might actually increase carbon a little bit, but in 120 years, it will reduce it. But even that is completely wrong, but they've made allowances for improvements in HS2 with decarbonised electricity and so on. They made some allowances for improvements in the alternatives if you didn't build HS2, but nothing like enough. So it's not true at all. It will actually put up the carbon from transport. It will not enable train services to run to British regions other than southeast of Paris and Brussels. This is a very attractive idea. You get on a train in Manchester, land up in Paris. You don't have to fly. There are two reasons why that doesn't work. One is that the longer the journey, the harder it is to be able to compete with their either on time or cost. But the other, even more critical argument is that if it did succeed in capturing this market, and there's some optimistic, in quotes, travel forecasts of the growth of this sector of the market, there's not enough in the market to justify an adequately frequent service, an acceptably frequent service. I think it comes to 2 trains a day in each direction, something like that. Well, no, the businessman, this simply isn't good enough. This actually goes right back to Channel Tunnel itself. The House of Commons promised that there'd be high-speed lines from all over Britain to meet the Channel Tunnel. It didn't happen. And when it didn't happen, the House of Commons got rather angry and said, well, build them anyway, even though it could be proved that they wouldn't be used. Very, very crazy anyway. Another argument which I think was particularly favoured by the Lib Dems, that you take enough travel away from domestic air services to allow the expansion of Heathrow or whatever, to allow international travel to be catered for, air travel, without having to build new airports or new runways. And this is trivial. The impact it will have is so small that it just doesn't affect the forecast. I'm not suggesting, incidentally, we should build these airports anyway. The Airports Commission brief, they published their interim report last December, was to examine the nature, scale and timing of any requirement for additional capacity to maintain the UK's global hub status. Well, because any solution to that, so it's a slight diversion, because any solution to the airport capacity problem, if you want to, is so expensive and so damaging, the brief should have been to examine the case for trying to do this, for maintaining the UK's status. And in addition to that, it can't be done anyway, except perhaps in North America, because the new airports coming in Bahrain and Istanbul and so on, they're just geographically a better place. And moreover, they're allowed to subsidise and we're not. So it's not needed or even helpful to increase capacity on the rest of the network or to provide for freight. Here, I'm afraid I will have to drop out. You'll just have to look up, or I can put on, if we get something going, I can put on what Chris has said about this. I have read it, I do understand it more or less, but I'm not going to try and explain it. It does not provide good value for money. First of all, the appraisal is based on, we either build HS2 or we do nothing, or next to nothing. We just do the things that are in the pipeline. Well, fairly obviously, to show that some course of action is better than doing nothing, may be a necessary condition. It is a necessary condition for doing it, but it's obviously not a sufficient one. There are lots of other things you can do. But secondly, I actually don't think it even passed this test against a do-nothing comparator. The official benefit cost ratios are not especially high. Important costs have been left out. All the environmental damage is left out. And the social damage. Where I live in Camden, there'll be a great deal of social damage. This just doesn't figure in the appraisal. Now, there's something to be said for not putting the environmental damage, you know, the damage on the children and so on, because you say, how do you put that in money terms? And what Philip Hammond said when he was Secretary of State, he said, we've got a separate environmental test. The implication was you have to pass both the economic test and the environmental test. But he didn't actually say what it was, what the test was, or what counters passing it. In my view, what one should do in these situations is simply say, we'll treat this as a constraint, the environment. In other words, we won't, not an absolute constraint, a provisional constraint, unless you can show there's some other nationally important objective which can't be met without doing this, then you just don't do it. Anyway, those costs have been left out. As I said just now, the forecasts for this route are plausibly high, but as well as that, the effectiveness of HS2 in competing with the existing trains, which will still be there, is also implausibly high. They simply assume that the fares will be the same on both services. And when he was questioned about this in a railway magazine, the technical director of HS2 said, well, I made that assumption because otherwise we'd be transporting air. So the business travel, this famous, I expect you're familiar with this, the idea that people don't work on trains, so that the business travel, if you get people, businessmen, save them an hour, half an hour, whatever. This is a huge part of the benefits. Of course, this isn't true. They do work in the train. As a matter of fact, they probably work harder or more productively because they're not interrupted. Actually, it's like, I'm not so sure that we should be putting business travel savings in it at all. I think I can't see the justification. But if you do put it in it, you must put in the right amount, and at the moment they're much too high. And then there are various other semi-technical questions about the long planning period. I mentioned low discount rates, incorrect treatment of revenues. This is semi-technical stuff and cost-benefit analysis, but there are lots and lots of things. I seriously wouldn't do it if it costs nothing at all, but you don't have to agree with that, because it does cost 50 billion. So how on earth did we get into this situation? And why didn't we get out when the faults became apparent? Well, as you know, the Labour Party officially put HS2 on the agenda when it set up the company HS2 Limited. I think it was in early 2009, it might be in late 2008. At that time, the company's role was only to plan and design. It wasn't actually to push it forward, or to see whether it should be built. Even then, we had an outfit called Greengrage 21 in 2006, which set up. They said at the time, we want to have a debate about whether we want high-speed rail in this country. Well, this is not a neutral debating chamber. The Conservatives claimed that they were already pushing for. They'd already committed themselves to HS2 before the Labour Party did. There's an article in The Guardian, it's, I think, August 2009, in which the chap says, we thought of this first. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and Lord Adonis has proved that again. The case of the high-speed rail is neither that it is visionary nor totemic of a modern transport infrastructure. It is quite simply that it addresses the central challenges of our transport network, congestion and enhanced capacity, economic growth in the environment. The Lib Dems, I think, got onto it even earlier for the reason I just gave. They thought it was going to avoid the need to build new runways, and it's very sensitive to them politically now. And the whole thing was, there was never any systematic procedure. Everyone said, what are the problems we're trying to solve? What are the alternative ways of solving it? All this is orthodox stuff of, this is what the Treasury would normally say you should do, or any rational person would say you should do. So there's nothing like that. And it's founded also, it's obviously founded in the belief in the merits of growth, GDP, and also what I call the predict and provide transport philosophy. You've got these demands, you have to meet them, regardless of the cost or the environmental damage. This goes back in road planning over 40 years. In fact, I coined the phrase in a book I wrote in 1972. And beyond that, people are bewitched by rail generally and bewitched by high tech, so you get the two things together. And there's no doubt also there's examples of other countries, in spite of what this Conservative said. He goes on to say, well, we have got HS1, it only amounts to 0.007% of Europe's total high-speed rail network. We've fallen behind a number of countries, including Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam. It's very, very much a prestige project. Other people have done it. The several things on that. First of all, it's not at all clear that the other countries were wise to do it. But even if they were, not only is our country different, but so is the base situation. Our intercity network is unrivaled. I'm not quite sure about Germany, but it's so good that you don't need. Spain had nothing, because Spain has been put forward as an example. So that's how it started. Why haven't we got over it? Well, politicians hate admitting mistakes, and of course they are also very ignorant. I mean, it's our system of government is so overloaded. You can't expect people who pronounce on these things. And Cameron pronounces on one moment about the dangers of over-prescribing antibiotics, and the next day about something else. It's a hopeless system. I haven't got time to quote them, but all the leaders have made fatuous remarks about why we need this. I'm also quite worried about, I'm very worried about the environmental movement. There was a significant moment at the end of 2011, the Transport Select Committee reported on this favourably, but they only reported on it favourably by one vote. And it's my opinion that if the environmental movement had got together and said, look, and said loudly and persistently, we like railways, we don't like this railway, I think that could have been overturned. They didn't do that. And the reason they did it is because of Campaign for Better Transport. Campaign for Better Transport set up just over 40 years ago. It's done a lot of good work in various fields, unconnected with railways. And it's looked up to by all the other environmental groups who don't have much expertise. Both Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace, I think I can say have a transport specialist, but only one, and Campaign for Better Transport is set up to deal with that, with transport, only with transport. And then you have the RSPB, the Woodland Trust, all these people, they don't have them. So they looked at Campaign for Better Transport for advice, and I'm afraid the Campaign for Better Transport was set up by the railway unions. I know it's got different, I don't know exactly what its sources of finance are now, they are diversified, but both its financial support and its, if you like, its ideological support of railway enthusiasts. John Whitelake, who a lot of you will know, a prominent Green, and John Adams, some of you may know him too, is professor, emeritus professor of geography at University College. May Holman and I have been struggling with Stephen Joseph for about 4 years. Absolutely no effect. It's very, very serious. I really do think that we could have stopped it then. There must be some people in the DFT and even in the Treasury who know how bad this is. Actually, the amateurism of Treasury and transport is hard to exaggerate, but in any case, it's a bit disquieting there be no whistleblowers. There must be people who know how bad it is. If you read the Permanent Secretary's remarks about how he dislikes naysayers, the Permanent Secretary of the DFT, you'll understand perhaps why there aren't any whistleblowers. But it's not only that they don't blow whistles, that it's actually a lot of extremely misleading information. Civil servants are not allowed to lie, but they are allowed to mislead, and they commonly do. A retired civil servant I know does not approve, of course, it's lying with the truth. Let me give you some examples of lying with truth at HS2. And a letter to me in a civil servant, also Lady Kramer in the House of Lords, made this remark saying, you can't get the capacity that a new line will give you by improving the existing network. That is absolutely true. It's lying with the truth because, as I said just now, you get all the capacity you need to meet the forecasts, in plausibly high forecasts, comfortably in that way. There was the Environmental Audit Committee in the House of Commons reported quite recently on this and suggested that until we decarbonise electricity, the train should run slower. And the government's response was very carefully worded. It said, HS2 Limited believe that this wouldn't work because if you made it go slower, you wouldn't get the, you wouldn't attract enough traffic from the more polluting modes, air and cars. Well, first of all, I said it was carefully worded, the government should respond what it believes and not just say HS2 Limited believes this. And secondly, it is absolute nonsense. The official forecasts are that only 1% of the custom on HS2 will come from air, 4% from cars, 69% will come from the existing conventional rail services, which are, because they go much slower, are much less polluting and energy intensive, and 26% are journeys that wouldn't otherwise be made. So the idea that it's so dishonest. Another example of dishonesty, I think it's in the 2000, they keep issuing this book, I think it's in the 2011 report, they did start looking at alternatives at long last, and they had Chris Stokes's in one of them. It came up very well. It had the highest benefit cost ratio. In the 2013, they again looked at alternatives. This one doesn't figure, and the reason it doesn't figure is apparently they say it doesn't provide the necessary connectivity. I'm not sure what HS2 does. But anyway, if you saved £48 billion, or let's be generous, if you saved £40 billion, that's a lot of money if you want to spend it on improving rail connectivity. I wouldn't spend it on that way, but far other things. In any case. And lastly, something which is I come from Camden, will suffer terribly by the route into Euston. And it was suggested by the Transport Select Committee that they should look at having Old Oak Common, not Euston as the terminus. They said we can't do that because the people going into the HS2 passengers who want to go to central London will be handicapped. It's simply not true. At Old Oak Common there's a link to Crossrail, and the next stations are Paddington, Bond Street, Tottenham Court Road, I missed that one, Farringdon and Liverpool Street. And if you change it to Old Oak Common, you'll get into all those stations faster than changing. And so we approached the HS2 Limited, said you must take this up the ministers. So I wrote to the minister and got a very dishonest letter back, which I've already quoted part of it. So, can HS2 now be stopped? I do find some hope in the decision of the Economic Affairs Committee of the House of Lords recently. They said they're going to investigate this. It's not obvious. They don't sort of fit into the bill procedure particularly well, so I think they must be worried. And I just looking yesterday or the day before at a snippet of the televised proceedings, and I was quite impressed by what the witnesses were saying and the way the committee was generally taking on board. So I do find some hope in that. We may be able to get the terminus changed through the petitioning process. And one of the points I'm making in my petition is that the comparison between these two terminals is really quite simple. And if they can't get that right, how on earth can they get it's conceptually simple, and the data requirements are not very demanding. So if they can't get that right, how can they be trusted with the rest of it? Apart from that, if anyone here has contacts with environmental NGOs, please exploit them. And lastly, if the Green Party wants to set up a sort of website about this, I can put in stuff I've written. I can also get Chris and Fish1M, whom he's been advising, to put stuff in, so that might be a useful resource.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We'll now have